Meet Paul, a seasoned company man who's seen it all, or so he thought. When three entitled rookies demand a tenfold salary increase or threaten to quit, Paul's patience hits its limit. These young hotshots, fresh out of MIT, think the world owes them everything, but they're about to get a harsh lesson in reality. As Paul navigates their absurd demands and reckless behavior, the tension builds to an unexpected showdown that could shake the entire company. What happens next? Well, let's just say, not everything goes according to their plan. If our salaries aren't increased tenfold, we're all quitting. Oh, is that so? I spat those words out in my mind. For the past year, though I've managed to endure it, I didn't think they were such naive, no, utterly ignorant kids. I understand that some people might be adults in age, but still children mentally. These three were exactly that. The problem was that they were only outstanding when it came to academics. Not only did they have impressive academic backgrounds, but they also had connections, so they joined the company without any trouble. I'm not disregarding connections or academic achievements. I can't deny they're valuable assets, and they should be used effectively. The biggest problem was that these guys were fixated on their own values. Honestly, it was foolish to waste more time and mental energy on those people. But if I left them be, it wouldn't benefit the company either. Most importantly, my subordinates were having their work disrupted by those three. To save them, I couldn't just stand by and do nothing. The world didn't revolve around them, and not everyone would do as they wished. As their superior, it was my duty to teach them this. To be honest, I didn't want to waste my time being kind and teaching such troublesome people, but I had no choice. It was just unlucky that those three were assigned to my department a year ago. My name is Paul Cook, and I'm a 42-year-old ordinary office worker. I'm currently the manager of the second section in the development department. It's already been 18 years since I started working at Kaida Trading. My life as a child was quite turbulent. When I had just started middle school, my father quit his job to start a business, resulting in the loss of almost all our assets. It's no surprise someone with no proper education in management couldn't possibly succeed. The one who stood up then was my mother, who had been a housewife until that point. She desperately looked for a job and worked tirelessly, her determination to support the family shining brightly in the eyes of her child. My father, who was depressed for a while, saw her efforts and managed to rebuild himself, eventually finding work at a small company. By the time I was preparing for college entrance exams, our family's finances had stabilized, allowing me to attend university. From this experience, I learned a few things. To accurately understand one's abilities, not to take on things beyond one's means, but to never forget to grow without being overly conservative. Some people mock me for lacking ambition, but ambition isn't something to be flaunted. It should be displayed when it truly matters. Like how my mother, who had been a housewife, made a firm decision to find work and support the family. The story began 2 years ago. 3 new recruits were assigned to the second section of development. Even though they were newcomers, the second section, always short-staffed, was thrilled to have 3 new members. Everyone expected them to become valuable team members soon since they had completed their training, but that was far from reality. They turned out to be such problematic employees that everyone was astonished. On their first day, during the introduction, the 3 newcomers boldly said to me, "We 3 are excellent graduates from MIT. Make sure you don't get left behind." For a moment, I was at a loss for words at the remark from Henry, who seemed to be the leader of the 3. When a person hears something outside their realm of common sense, they can't react. Apparently, Henry took my silence as intimidation. With a beaming smile, he added, "Don't worry, we'll go easy on you. I mean, aren't you a graduate from one of those local private colleges? It's impressive you managed to become a section chief. I took a deep breath to calm myself. Did he even understand what he was saying? Didn't he know that it was not something a new employee should say to their superior? I probably had a look of disbelief on my face, but they didn't seem to notice. The three of them walked away with a stride that said, "We got him with the first shot." It was as if they had "We're cool for speaking up to the chief on our first day" written on their backs. But what I actually saw was "We're foolish." The real unfortunate one was my subordinate, in his third year, who was assigned as their trainer. I read through their resumes again. They graduated from MIT with excellent grades. Many students and graduates from that university have high pride. However, whether they can work in a manner befitting that pride is another matter. Moreover, the side effects of the intense study with tutors and cram schools, that is, it produces naive and sheltered young adults. These three were prime examples of that. I wondered why HR hired such people. When I asked my colleague in HR, the answer became clear. Henry was the nephew of the executive director. It was a case of nepotism, and they even hired his entourage along with him. I couldn't help but sigh. The job of a new employee is similar in any company. They start with menial tasks and gradually learn the work of the department. It takes a considerable amount of time to become fully capable in their job. But it seemed Henry didn't understand this either. "So, when are we going to get some real work? Do you understand the term, right person for the right job? Don't you think it's a waste of talent?" A week after their assignment, he came to my desk and said this arrogantly. Of course, the other two were standing right behind him. "Why don't you have the female employees handle the menial tasks? People like us, who graduated with honors from MIT, shouldn't be doing such things." Henry said this loudly enough for everyone in the development department to hear. Half of the men in the room pretended not to hear, having moved past being merely shocked. The other half, the women, couldn't hide their anger. They were glaring at the backs of the three with such intensity that if looks could kill, their clothes would have been full of holes by now. But the three, overestimating themselves, were oblivious to the atmosphere and remained unfazed. How insensitive. It was not really my job to teach such people basic manners. But as their superior, I did have some responsibility. I didn't want colleagues from other departments saying, "Paul, you're not doing a good job training your subordinates. All right, tell me what kind of work you want to do. Do you have any good ideas?" Henry started speaking confidently. He said that someone with their excellent academic achievements from MIT shouldn't be doing tasks for others. It's obvious we should be leading a team. Project leader is the job that suits us. This was just too much. I asked what kind of work he wanted to do. In other words, in the development department, what part of the work he wanted to take on. I also told him to speak up if he had any new ideas. All he said was that he wanted to be a leader. He hadn't thought at all about the actual work and only insisted on becoming a team leader. This made him completely useless. What can people who don't have specific goals for their work accomplish, especially in the development section? This department is supposed to pioneer new fields. We need to figure out what kinds of products will be popular, necessary, and in demand in the future. With that in mind, we exchange opinions and move toward full-scale development. That's the kind of department this is. And he thought he could be a project leader without understanding the basics. "Paul, don't disappoint us." I was the one who was disappointed. "Oh man, someone please take over as manager for me." My subordinates must have sensed my feelings. They looked at me with pity and then turned away as if to say, "We can't handle it either." I had drawn the short straw. I decided to think of the trio as children, specifically as kindergartners. Small children live in a world where they are the center. They don't notice the people around them or observe their surroundings. They can't read the room, of course. And if their desires aren't met, they throw tantrums. That was exactly what they were. At least, they didn't throw tantrums and cry. Every day, they would loudly complain. It's painful to work under an uncultured boss who doesn't recognize our worth. How do you all keep quiet and work? Oh, that's right. If you don't have any value, You can't say anything. They spoke rudely to experienced employees and treated the female employees like housekeepers. Naturally, everyone came to despise them and stopped interacting with them. But the trio remained oblivious to this. I hadn't realized just how insensitive and self-centered they were. It was about time to do something, as it was affecting the morale of the department. Partly because of this, and because they were so noisy about wanting real work, I appointed them as chiefs of a small project. Of course, it was just a decorative title. I asked a capable, experienced female employee to prop them up and leave them be. "I'm sorry, but you're good at guiding people like this, so I need your help. I'll make it up to you later." She looked at me with pity and said,
It's unfortunate for you to keep dealing with them, so I'll take care of it.
Thanks to her and the other team members, the project was completed successfully. Henry and his crew claimed the credit, but of course, no one believed them. They were kept busy within the team in a way that they wouldn't cause trouble. All the other subordinates knew this. The only ones who didn't know were the trio themselves. After the project ended, I asked the female employee who led the team about the outcome of the other tasks I had entrusted to her. "So, how did things go on that other matter?"
They said something pretty fatal. I didn't expect it to be that bad.
Then she added with a smile, "I sent the files over." I thanked her again. With all this going on, the fiscal year end passed, and the salary review meeting concluded. Many of my subordinates received significant raises, except for Henry and his two cronies. "What is this, Paul? We successfully completed that project, and we get no raise. That's negligence." It's clear that without us, the other incompetent teams would have made a mess of things. I sighed without saying anything, and Henry clicked his tongue and turned away. The next morning, Henry and his two followers came to my desk with resignation letters. "This is our final warning. If our salaries aren't increased tenfold, we're all quitting. Losing excellent talents like us would be a huge loss for the company. You'd obviously be fired too. Just so you know, my uncle is the executive director of this company. Are you willing to make an enemy of the executives?" I just stared back at them because I didn't care, but they must have thought I was scared. Henry continued to boast. My college peers at other companies were shocked when they heard about the work we did. They wondered why we hadn't been promoted. Everyone in the department froze, including myself. Did he really tell people from other companies about the project details? He should know about confidentiality obligations. I was sure they must have been surprised. Who would expect someone to loudly talk about corporate secrets to outsiders? It was beyond redemption. I'd been trying to manage them, but this would jeopardize the company's future. Reluctantly, I had to take action. I stared at the three and picked up the resignation letters from my desk. "Got it." Ignoring their stunned faces, I opened the company email app and sent a message. Then I stood up. Leaving the development office, I headed straight to the CO's office, greeted his secretary, and entered. "Mr. Walker," the CO greeted me with a smile and asked, "What's going on?" I briefly explained the situation, and as expected, Mr. Walker's expression turned sour. He then said one thing: "We'll accept all their resignations." Of course, but I think it's dangerous to leave them unchecked. Mr. Walker thought for a moment, then nodded and instructed his secretary to call Henry and his cronies. He offered me a seat on the sofa, but I chose to remain standing, waiting for them. It didn't take long before they walked in, looking smug and proud. We came as soon as we were called. Their faces seemed to say, "Mr. Walker recognizes our project's success. Serves you right." Mr. Walker's expression remained stern, and no words of praise were forthcoming. He simply stared at them, which made them start to wonder. Their eyes darted around. They had expected to be praised, but they began to realize they were actually called to be reprimanded, and their expressions grew increasingly anxious. Then their wandering eyes landed on me, and Henry's expression shifted again. "Paul, why are you in Mr. Walker's office? Don't you think it's out of your league?" "Oh, I see. You're here to cover up your failures by bad-mouthing us and cozying up to Mr. Walker." I stifled the sigh that threatened to escape. Mr. Walker, on the other hand, let out a big sigh without trying to hide it and spoke with effort. Your name was Henry, correct? Henry, do you really understand what you've done? The three of them looked puzzled, and Henry repeated, Mr. Walker, I don't know what this guy said, but it's out of jealousy towards elites like us. He's just good at sucking up to higher ups. Besides, I joined this company with the support of my uncle, Jacob. As a graduate with honors from MIT, my uncle was more than happy to help me join the company. Henry's smug expression only made Mr. Walker's face darker. I see. So that makes me a foolish CO who gets deceived by people who are good at sucking up to their superiors. Even the insensitive Henry seemed to realize that this was bad. He hurriedly began muttering excuses. I hesitated for a moment, but decided to step in. You have done and said many things that you shouldn't have. The biggest problem is that you can't distinguish between right and wrong. Moreover, you don't even realize that you can't make that distinction. What did you say? You are just an arrogant chief from a third-rate university. Henry yelled, but Mr. Walker quietly interjected. Hall holds a master's degree from Harvard University. I almost felt sad seeing the dumbfounded faces of Henry and his cronies. Indeed, I had gone to graduate school at Harvard University. My professor at the time had been very insistent that I stay on, and my parents agreed. However, after graduation, I didn't stay in the lab. I shook off the professor's hand and joined this company. Being an economist isn't exactly a lucrative job. In my view, academic background isn't particularly important for living as a productive member of society. The attitude towards work after entering the workforce is what matters most. I almost felt pity for them, being so fixated on academic qualifications. At that moment, the door to Mr. Walker's office burst open, and a stout man in his 60s rushed in. It was Jacob. He was a high-ranking figure, and since we worked in different areas, I hadn't met him personally. But of course, I knew his face. He didn't seem like the type to have a nephew like this. I'd heard he was known for being cautious and prudent. As soon as he entered, he shouted at his nephew, What are you doing, trying to disgrace me? When Mr. Walker informed me, I was shocked and panicked. Henry shook his head vigorously and tried to calm his uncle. Uncle Jacob, calm down. This is all a trap to bring us down. Both you and Mr. Walker are being deceived by this man. He pointed at me and yelled. He's trying to undermine us because he can't do his job properly. As a person, he's the lowest of the low. Jacob looked a bit hesitant after hearing those words. It's understandable, given that it was his beloved nephew speaking. I'd also heard that Jacob was quite partial to his family. I turned to look at Mr. Walker. He sighed once more. Jacob, I understand that you want to believe your nephew, but I also want to believe my son-in-law. The room's atmosphere froze. I shrugged slightly. Yes, Mr. Walker was my father-in-law. 18 years ago, Mr. Walker's daughter joined the company as a regular employee, hiding her identity to gain social experience. I joined the company at the same time, and we hit it off at a company party. Not knowing her true identity, I fell in love with her and started dating her. When it came time to propose, I discovered that she was Mr. Walker's daughter. When I found out, I told her, I want to marry you, not Mr. Walker's daughter. Her face lit up as soon as I said those words.
That's why I fell in love with you. Everyone else saw me as an accessory to the company, not as myself.
Mr. Walker had said that he could entrust his daughter to a man like me. So within the company, I'm just an ordinary employee, nothing more. I earned my position as a chief on my own. But having my status as Mr. Walker's son-in-law revealed at a time like this was complicated. It made me feel like I was deceiving everyone by standing on the side of those in power. Honestly, I hate that sort of thing, but in this case, it seemed using my connections would resolve things smoothly. However, Henry was persistent. So, Paul was Mr. Walker's son-in-law and a spy. He's trying to bring us down, and yes, he's also trying to bring you down, Uncle. He plans to take your place as executive director. Jacob looked from Mr. Walker to me, his eyes filled with uncertainty. I could understand his feelings. It's natural to cling to one's position and status. People often prioritize their real world, standing over their ideals. and that's a necessary means of surviving in this world. But I couldn't just let it go. If this continued, Mr. Walker might end up being wrongly suspected. I didn't want to be misunderstood as someone trying to oust Jacob to become an executive. No choice then. I had to fight cunning with cunning. I operated my smartphone. A voice started playing from my phone. Why don't you have the female employees handle the menial tasks? People like us, who graduated with honors from MIT, shouldn't be doing such things. So, what kind of work do you want to do? It's obvious we should be leading a team. This is our final warning. If our salaries aren't increased tenfold, we're all quitting. Losing excellent talents like us would be a huge loss for the company. You'd obviously be fired too. Just so you know, my uncle is the executive director of this company. Are you willing to make an enemy of the executives? The recording feature on my smartphone was really handy at times like that. I also opened the audio file given to me by the female employee who had been the shadow project leader. The recording from the project's team meeting played. What are you still whining about? Consumers aren't that smart. We can keep them dancing in the palm of our hands. If we're making cheap private label products, we should use cheap materials. There's no need to be serious about cost calculations. In fact, doing so is a waste of time. If we buy cheap materials in bulk, we can make it even cheaper. If there's any left over, just throw it away. Work more efficiently, you useless bunch. Henry's outrageous remarks filled the silent Mr. Walker's office. Mr. Walker's eyes flashed sharply. His motto was to devise cost-effective private label products and provide them to consumers, not driven solely by profit. He always emphasized this to his employees during his addresses. Business is not just about making a profit for the seller. The customers must also prosper. Henry and his cronies had effectively ignited Mr. Walker's anger. Jacob shrank back. He was one of the key executives who had built this company alongside Mr. Walker. He should be well aware of Mr. Walker's principles. Seeing him apologize to Mr. Walker looked almost pitiful. However, Henry, ignoring his surroundings, made one last attempt to resist. Recording us like this, it's too cunning. Jacob raised his head and glared at Henry. His face was flushed red. He seemed too angry and embarrassed to speak. Even Henry fell silent at this point. I couldn't help but worry about Jacob's blood pressure. Nevertheless, he seemed to calm himself. Then he apologized to me. Mr. Cook, I am deeply sorry. It is truly shameful. Allowing this to go unchecked is entirely my responsibility. I told him that it wasn't necessary for him to apologize. I knew he was a decent person because Mr. Walker had chosen him as an executive. He was just blinded by familial affection. But he had the courage to admit his mistakes and apologize, showing what a great person he was. Jacob apologized to me once more before turning to Henry and his cronies. Even they seemed to realize there was no escape now. They looked at Jacob with pleading eyes, but still didn't seem to understand what they had done wrong. Jacob must have realized this. His frustration and anger boiled over. You're all fired. Mr. Walker plugged his ears with his fingers at the loud outburst. I started to worry about Jacob's blood pressure again. Henry and his followers stood there in stunned silence, still not comprehending. It was understandable for Jacob to shout, and firing them was certainly a reasonable course of action. But given the circumstances, that may not have been a wise idea. Jacob, I understand how you feel, but firing them might not be the best solution. Jacob looked at me in surprise and asked why. First of all, please just call me Paul. I'm just a chief and much younger and less experienced than you. Jacob seemed to want to say something, but I continued. If new employees who join through Jacob's influence are fired instead of resigning voluntarily, it could lead to unnecessary rumors. Also, if they leave now, their resumes will list our company's name, which could potentially damage our reputation. Jacob looked at me and then at Mr. Walker. Mr. Walker nodded in agreement. So what do you suggest? Jacob asked me. These spoiled, overeducated kids should restart from the ground up. How about putting them in the field? Mr. Walker smiled wryly and Jacob nodded in understanding. Henry and the other two still stood there, clueless. I suggested sending them to work in the large supermarket chain run by our company. I asked the field manager to let them do everything from carrying goods, stocking shelves, and cleaning. However, I added that they should not be allowed to deal with customers. The field manager, who had risen through the ranks, enthusiastically accepted the challenge. Jacob informed Henry's family and the families of the other two about the whole situation. He asked them to refrain from providing any support until they showed some improvement. Henry's parents were shocked to learn about their son's behavior. They apologized to Jacob and asked him to help their son become a proper member of society. The same request came from the families of the other two. While my brother and his wife are responsible people, they seem to have overindulged their son. That was how those spoiled boys came to be. As the saying goes, birds of a feather flock together, and the other two followed his lead. Currently, the three of them are doing heavy labor, such as carrying goods in the back of the supermarket. They are being scolded by the very people they look down on, labeled as young men who can't do their jobs. They were kicked out of their homes, and their credit cards were canceled. They now live in an old apartment Jacob found for them, just scraping by. They're surviving on an income equivalent to a part-time job. I hope this hardship serves as a valuable lesson, helping them become proper members of society. As for me, I'm just doing my job as usual. I perform my daily tasks diligently and return home. My wife, who works shorter hours, gets home first and greets me with our children. The only notable change is that I no longer work overtime. My wife's health hasn't been great, so I need to prepare meals and handle household chores. We're expecting our third child next year. I'll need to adjust the division of household duties a bit more. And still, there's one thing I wish I could resolve: Mr. Walker's request. You truly are the man I anticipated you'd be. Isn't it about time you accepted my offer to take over for me? I'm just a chief, an ordinary person, and a father to a loving wife and soon-to-be 3 children. That's more than enough for me, and it's all I can handle. I have a principle not to take on more than I can manage. As much as I appreciate Mr. Walker's high regard for me, this is one thing I won't budge on. I can manage a department, but I'm not cut out to be the company's overall leader. I haven't forgotten the vow I made at the beginning of my career. I won't take on work beyond my capacity.
That's why I still love you.
My wife says so. And so, I am more than happy. For the sake of my precious family's future, I will continue to move forward, firmly grounded